To discuss the issue of violence at schools, we are now joined on the line by Mary de Haas, a violence monitor and research fellow at the KwaZulu-Natal School of Law, and she joins me now live on the line. Good afternoon to you, Mary. Thank you so much for coming through. I think firstly, really, let's look into the level of violence in school. Has it increased or has it remained the same?
Good afternoon, police and listeners. Look, with regard to the levels of violence, it's impossible to say. It's been going on for years. I don't think we have the type of statistics that would allow us to say it's actually increasing. It's a long-standing problem, and it's a very serious problem because when there's violence in schools, the children are bringing it to schools from the environments from which they come, starting with the families.
But as you say, this is quite a long-standing problem, Mary. The incidents that we are starting to see now, have they always been as horrific as this particular one that we're reporting on this afternoon on the stabbing incident at Turffontein?
Look, yes, I've come across other incidents in this province where learners have died. In fact, there have been instances in which other learners have had access to parental guns and brought them to school. And, that can be even an accident, showing off a gun. So it's not a unique thing. It's horrific, but they're all horrific incidents.
And a lot of people and researchers are saying that South Africa is a very violent country. We are a violent nation as it is. Let us just talk about what could have been the contributing factors and why are we seeing so many incidents of violence in our schools?
Look, it starts with the home. I mean, we've got a very, very abnormally high rate of violence against women and violence against children. And it's been known for decades, that if children grow up in a violent environment, if they're abused, if they witness abuse, they're going to carry on that abuse themselves. So what they do is they take it out of the home, and if they're in a community where there's lots of people like that, it makes it worse because then you get the gangs and you get the institution of violent ways of dealing with problems. And, I mean, it happens with all colours, all classes, but it's always a very noticeable problem in areas of deprivation where kids form gangs, for example, to assert themselves. But it can happen in any environment. But it always starts with the home. And then you look at the way, that are there stable role models? If father abuses mother regularly and abuses all the kids will think, well, this is the way we deal with problems, so I'll use it myself, I'll take it to school. And you get bullying, of course, too, which is another form of gross emotional abuse, even if it's not accompanied by overt violence. And I mean, there are ways of dealing with this. I just don't know why we haven't dealt with it. Why after 25 years of democracy there are tried and tested ways of at least, lessening the impact of this violence, and yet no one seems to be taking it seriously enough to look into what we can do about it.
Yeah. Now, talking about violence, the possibility of violence starting at home, really, let's look into the issue of spanking. Could this be attributed to violence as well if parents go as far as spanking their kids if they misbehave?
Look, it's an emotive subject. I mean, I can tell you it doesn't, physical punishment doesn't achieve anything. But I don't know that, I'm not in favor of it myself. And, I mean, I know, for example, in other countries where it's not used, it doesn't have any particular impact not using it. But I think that it's difficult to generalize. If a child gets an occasional spanking, depending on the context, it might not necessarily make that child a violent person, but it's more likely to, put it that way. So I think spanking should be avoided. There's much better ways of instilling discipline in kids than spanking. I know, as I said, it's an emotive subject, but I'm not aware that in itself, I think there's been research showing this, that it actually helps to... You see, what you've got to do with kids is teach them self-discipline. Yeah. They've got to learn, and you do that through having proper role models who show love, affection, and in those first few years shape the conscience of that child as to what is right and wrong. And, you know, that this is the way we treat other people. We treat them with dignity. We don't, when we have a problem, there are ways of solving problems. Now, all of this could be actually, even with deficiencies in families, there are programs. I mean, in this province, we've had a program we had since the 1970s called Education for Living, which could be done in school by a trusted school counsellor, which would help with these problems.
Just a quick one in conclusion, Mary. Let's look at what transpired in court today, the community's response really to the judgment. There were some members who were not pleased, of course, with the 19-year-old being granted bail. Could more violence perhaps arise from this particular situation? We've heard others last week, the parents really going as far as saying they will not allow him back to that particular school. So are we in for more violence in that particular school going forward?
This does happen. I mean, there have been threats in another community. I know that if people are giving bail, there'll be violence. But I mean, I can't forecast that. I mean, a lot depends on the conditions of bail. A lot depends on whether there's a very strict monitoring of those conditions, because the child should not be back in the community. That may well provoke violence. The bail conditions, I don't know what they are, but they would have been better if the child is moved off somewhere else and strictly monitored during that period. So it's impossible to forecast. I mean, the emotion of the court and the bail granting has erupted. People, I mean, that's the whole problem here. You know, it's become a norm to react to things with violence, and unless we start when children are small to teach them that that's not the way to solve problems, it's just going to carry on.
All right, Mary, we'll leave it at this. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Mary de Haas, a violence monitor and research fellow at the KwaZulu-Natal School of Law, giving us her insights really on this particular court case.